What if the child you loved more than life itself became the very reason you stopped breathing? That's not just a haunting question. That's the reality Tracy Reiner now lives with every single day. December 14th wasn't just another headline in Hollywood. It was the day America's storytelling royalty, Rob Reiner, the beloved actor-director behind The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, and Stand By Me, and his wife Michelle, were brutally ripped from the world. Found lifeless. Gone. Slain in the sanctuary of their own Brentwood home. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And the suspect? Their own son, Nick Reiner, age 32, was arrested at the scene, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. But the most bone-chilling detail isn't in the court documents. It's in the silence that followed. For days, weeks, one voice remained missing. The voice of Tracy Reiner, Rob's daughter. A Hollywood actress in her own right. A woman shaped by the wisdom of her father, the kindness of her stepmother, and the storm that was her half-brother. And when Tracy finally spoke, the world stopped again. Nick, she said, wanted to live a life that didn't exist. He was entitled. He didn't want to do any work, but expected to be loved the way the rest of his family was. Cold, brutal, or finally, the truth? Because Tracy's words weren't just a statement. They were a confession, a release, and perhaps a warning. So how did it come to this? How did a family of Hollywood legends become the center of a modern Greek tragedy? What really happened behind the gated walls of the Reiner estate that Sunday morning? What clues had been missed, ignored, or worse, covered up? And who really was Nick Reiner? Was he a victim of pressure and legacy? A misunderstood man crying for help in a world too focused on success? Or was he a ticking time bomb, fueled by jealousy, denial, and silent rage? You're about to enter a world where the lines between love and fear, fame and failure, loyalty and loss blur until they vanish entirely. And at the center of it all, a daughter left to pick up the pieces and tell the story that no one else dared to. But first, let's rewind. Because to understand why Tracy's words matter now, why her silence-breaking hit like a detonation, you have to know what came before it. Not the press releases, not the funeral eulogies. The truth. The raw, jagged truth. Let's go back. Not to December, but to the early years. Back when Nick was just a boy, and everything seemed perfect. Or was it? The golden years that were anything but. Rob Reiner had it all. By the time Nick was born, Rob had already conquered the impossible, transitioning from comedic television royalty, All in the Family, to one of the most beloved directors in Hollywood history. His wife, Michelle, a formidable intellect, a passionate activist, was his rock, and their blended family. From the outside, it sparkled like gold. But inside, cracks were forming, quietly, invisibly, fatally. According to insiders close to the family, and private journals that would only surface after the tragedy, Nick struggled with identity from the beginning. He wasn't just Rob Reiner's son. He was expected to be a Reiner. Do you know what that means? It means walking into a room and people already assuming you're brilliant. It means living in the shadow of stories that shaped generations. It means being told, without words, that your last name is a legacy, so you'd better not mess it up. And for Nick, that pressure didn't ignite greatness. It swallowed him whole. He turned to addiction early. By 14, according to court-admitted rehab records, he'd been in and out of multiple treatment centers. And yet, here's the twist. The Reiners never stopped supporting him. They loved him. Fiercely. Blindly. Completely. But here's where things begin to shift. Because sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes, love becomes enabling. And that's the part Tracy could never forget. The warnings Tracy tried to give. You know that feeling you get when something's just off? Tracy did. From the moment Nick turned 17, she told friends that she felt unnerved around him. Not scared. Not threatened. Just off. It wasn't the drugs. It wasn't the tantrums. It was the delusion. Nick wanted to be a screenwriter, then an actor, then a director. He had ideas, but no discipline. He had ambition, but no action. He wanted the end result of fame, without the work it took to build it. And when it didn't come, he blamed everyone around him. Hollywood is rigged. My father never helped me. Tracy's jealous of me. The victim mindset metastasized, and Tracy watched it happen in slow motion. She said something to Rob once. Something we now know from a source close to the family. If Nick doesn't get real help, he's going to explode. And Rob, he didn't dismiss it, but he didn't act on it either. Because when you're a parent, when it's your son, how do you believe he could ever hurt you? The final days, and the chill before the storm. December 12th, 2 days before the murders. A quiet family dinner, described by Tracy as strangely normal. But the tension? Unmistakable. Nick had grown withdrawn, paranoid. He barely spoke. He refused to eat. And when Tracy said goodbye that night, she says he hugged her harder than usual. Too hard, too long, and whispered something strange in her ear. You'll remember me for this. At the time, she thought he meant an emotional breakthrough. That maybe he was finally taking responsibility. She didn't know. He meant that. And then it happened. December 14th. Morning. The housekeeper arrived to the Brentwood estate and knew instantly something was wrong. Doors unlocked. Silence too deep. A phone vibrating endlessly on the marble counter. And then, 2 bodies. 1 man, 1 woman. Both gone. Stab wounds. Multiple. Defensive injuries. A sign of a struggle. But what shocked detectives wasn't the brutality. It was what came after. Nick, sitting on the back porch. Calm. Smoking. Covered in blood. Not trying to flee. Not trying to deny. Just sitting there waiting. The world reacts. But Tracy says nothing. News spreads like wildfire. Rob Reiner. Dead. His wife Michelle, dead. Their own son arrested. Hollywood reels. Tributes pour in. And yet, silence from one voice. Tracy. She doesn't post. Doesn't speak. Doesn't attend the first court hearing. The media speculates. Some say she's too grief-stricken. Others suggest legal strategy. But the truth? She was writing something. Not a statement. Not a tweet. But a reckoning. Because for Tracy, this wasn't just a tragedy. It was the end of a slow-motion collapse she'd seen coming for years. And when she finally spoke, the world wasn't ready. Tracy's first words. He wanted a life that didn't exist. No fluff. No apology. No carefully worded legalese. Just a dagger of truth. And the most disturbing part? It wasn't just an attack on Nick. It was a reflection on the system, the parenting, the enabling, the denial. He didn't want to do any work, she said, but expected to be loved the way the rest of his family was. Some called her harsh. Others, brave. But Tracy wasn't speaking for pity. She was speaking for survival. Because when the world paints your family in gold, no one sees the rot until it's too late. But the real twist? Tracy claims there's still more we don't know. More about that final dinner. More about a voicemail Rob left just hours before his death. More about a sealed envelope, labeled, "If anything happens to me." An envelope now in Tracy's possession. And what's inside will change everything we thought we knew. Have you ever looked at someone you love and felt an instinct deep in your gut whispering, something is wrong? That's how Tracy Reiner described it. Not fear, not panic, just a cold tingle behind the ribs. A pressure in the chest that builds every time that person walks into the room. That was Nick, her half-brother, the boy who grew up in the same house, ate at the same table, shared Christmas mornings and awkward family photos. The same boy she once tucked in at night, who years later would leave her in tears after a single conversation. I always knew something was coming, she whispered to a friend just days after the tragedy. I didn't know what, but I knew. And that feeling? It wasn't sudden. It had been there for years, like a fault line running beneath the family estate. Quiet, invisible, until it cracked wide open. The world may have been stunned by the headlines that December morning. But Tracy? She had been waiting for the aftershock her whole life. Nick's early years, the other child in a golden house. Let's rewind. Not to the crime, not yet, but to the childhood that built this storm. Tracy was older. She had already navigated the complicated world of being Rob Reiner's daughter. The press, the expectations, the backstage whispers. Nick was born into it, raised under brighter lights, but with far more shadows. From the start, he was different, not just emotionally sensitive, but wired differently. That's how Tracy explained it once to a therapist. He couldn't tolerate frustration, couldn't manage being ignored. If a room didn't center around him, he'd find a way to force it to. He'd throw something, Tracy recalled, or cry, or accuse you of being fake. And then 10 minutes later, he'd be hugging you like nothing happened. What do you do with that when it's your brother? You forgive. Over and over again. You tell yourself he's just emotional. He's finding his way. He's artistic. He's young. But slowly, the moments start piling up. The temper tantrums. The outbursts at restaurants. The teachers calling home. The slammed doors, broken dishes, cold glares. And then, the manipulations. Tracy remembered one Christmas in particular. Nick was 12. He hadn't bought a gift for anyone. But when the family started opening presents, he began fake crying. Loud, dramatic sobs that took all attention off the tree and onto him. He wasn't embarrassed. He was grinning. That was the first time Tracy felt it. That voice in her gut. This isn't normal. Hollywood's favorite family, or so it seemed. The Reiners were the American dream. Rob was a household name. Michelle, his wife, was elegant and respected. They were liberal royalty in Los Angeles. Their circle included movie stars, politicians, and legendary directors. Their dinner parties were featured in Vanity Fair spreads. But what the glossy spreads didn't show was what happened after the guests left. By Nick's teenage years, things were spiraling. He hated school, refused to participate in family outings, accused Tracy of thinking she was better than him. He became obsessed with fame, but didn't want to earn it. He wanted to be adored without doing anything worth adoring. Tracy said years later. He thought being a Reiner was enough. And maybe that's part of the problem. Fame, in its ugliest form, can rob people of effort. It can twist their expectations. Nick didn't just want to succeed. He wanted to be worshipped. And when that didn't happen, he started to break. The first explosion. Tracy will never forget it. She was 25. Nick was 15. They were visiting Rob's home office. Nick had found an old photo album, shots from behind the scenes of Stand By Me. Cast photos. On-set moments. A young Rob smiling with River Phoenix and Corey Feldman. Nick stared at one picture for nearly 2 minutes. Then slammed the album shut. "What's wrong?" Tracy asked. His answer chilled her. He loved them more than me. It didn't make sense. It wasn't rational. But it didn't need to be. He wasn't reacting to facts. He was reacting to feelings, a deep-rooted belief that he had been robbed of attention, that others got love he never received, that his father's genius, fame, and relationships with other people were somehow betrayals. The next day, he punched a hole through the wall of the guest house. That was the first time Rob sent him to therapy. It wouldn't be the last. Tracy's warning signs, and Rob's refusal. It's hard to tell a parent their child scares you. It's even harder when that parent is your parent too. Tracy tried. Quietly, gently, urgently. She would call Rob after a particularly vicious phone call with Nick, or when he showed up at events uninvited and clearly high, or after he sent her text messages that seemed like veiled threats. "I'm fine, Dad," she once said. "But I'm not okay being alone with him anymore." Rob listened, but didn't act. "Tracy," he'd say, "he's just trying to figure himself out." To which she'd reply, "At what cost?" She begged him to consider a stricter boundary, to take away access to money, to set rules, to stop enabling. But Rob was caught between two truths. He loved his son, and he feared what would happen if he didn't. And so nothing changed. The journal Tracy wasn't supposed to find. In 2017, Tracy was visiting the Brentwood estate for Rob's birthday. Nick had moved back into the guest house, again, after his most recent stint in rehab. Tracy was helping Michelle organize old boxes from the attic when she found it. A black leather journal. Unlabeled. No lock. Inside, pages of sketches, ramblings, and chilling statements. One phrase repeated more than once. "Nobody sees me unless I break something." There were lists. Names of producers, critics, celebrities. All with crossed-out phrases. Liar. Fake. User. One page simply read, "What happens if the king and queen disappear?" Tracy froze. She didn't tell Rob. Not right away. She was torn between panic and guilt, between wanting to alert the family and not wanting to ignite another spiral. But now, years later, she wishes she had done more. The shifting dynamic, Tracy versus Nick. By 2020, the siblings had barely spoken. Tracy had cut off most personal contact. Their only communication came through Rob and Michelle. But even then, Nick found ways to get under her skin. Emails sent at 3 a.m. Messages left on public posts. Comments like, "You'll never be the real Reiner. Dad only cares about your success because he failed with me. You think you're safe, but you're not." At one point, she filed a police report, but no charges were filed. And Rob? He was heartbroken, caught between two children, two worlds, and a silence that kept growing. The dinner that changed everything. Fast forward to December 12th, 2025. A family dinner, meant to be small. Rebuilding, perhaps. Nick seemed distant, detached. Tracy described it as watching a ghost move through the house. He barely spoke, stared at his food, twitched his foot under the table nonstop. And then, when Tracy stood to leave, Nick hugged her. Tightly, too tightly, and whispered something that would haunt her forever. "You'll remember me for this." What did he mean? At the time, Tracy thought maybe it was a truce, a sign of emotional maturity. She didn't know. He meant murder. But the journal wasn't the only thing she found. The next morning, she would wake up to a call from police. But days later, while gathering her father's personal effects, she would discover something even more chilling. A sealed envelope, one her father had labeled in his handwriting. "If anything happens to me," and inside, not just words, but a truth so explosive. It could change everything the world believed about the Reiner family and Nick's path to darkness. What happens when someone believes the world owes them everything, but gives them nothing? What happens when fantasy feels more real than reality? For Nick Reiner, the answer wasn't disappointment. It was rage, and Tracy saw it long before anyone else was willing to name it. Nick didn't just dream big. Plenty of people do that. He didn't just want success. That's normal too. Nick believed he was already successful, even when nothing in his life proved it. And that belief, that was the alternate reality he lived in. A reality where effort was optional, failure was someone else's fault, and love was something you were entitled to simply by existing. Tracy called it his invisible throne. He walked through life like a king without a kingdom, demanding loyalty from people who had never sworn allegiance. And the moment someone questioned that illusion, they became the enemy. The fantasy begins. Nick was barely out of high school when he started telling people he was developing projects. Not working on them. Not writing. Not pitching. Developing. It sounded important. Powerful. Vague enough that no one could challenge it. At family gatherings, he'd corner Rob's friends, producers, writers, directors, and talk endlessly about ideas that never went anywhere. High-concept thrillers. Political epics. Revolutionary comedies. When someone asked for a script, he'd deflect. When they offered feedback, he'd bristle. When they suggested starting small, he'd scoff. "I'm not meant for small," he once snapped at a family friend. "That's for people without vision." Tracy heard about these moments secondhand at first. Then she saw them herself. The way Nick's face hardened when someone changed the subject. The way he'd smile, tight, forced, when praised, but explode later if the praise wasn't loud enough or public enough. It wasn't ambition. It was entitlement dressed up as destiny. The first delusion that scared Tracy. There was a night in 2018 Tracy never talks about publicly. Until now. Nick had shown up unannounced at a small industry mixer Tracy was attending. He wasn't invited. He wasn't on the list. He had no business being there. But he walked in like he owned the room. Introduced himself as Nick Reiner, Rob's son, without waiting to be asked. He told one producer he was the next voice of a generation. Told another he was working on something bigger than anything my dad ever did. And then came the moment Tracy still can't shake. Nick pulled her aside and whispered, almost gleefully, "They don't know it yet, but they're going to need me." Need him. Not want. Not like. Need. That word stuck in her chest like a shard of glass. Because need implies power. And Nick had none. Except the kind he imagined. Addiction and the echo chamber. By his early 20s, Nick's substance abuse wasn't a secret anymore. Alcohol, pills, cocaine, whatever numbed the gap between who he believed he was and what his life actually looked like. But here's the contradiction that haunted Tracy the most. Even at his lowest points, Nick never saw himself as struggling. He saw himself as misunderstood. He'd come back from rehab talking about toxic environments and people who couldn't handle his truth. Never accountability. Never humility. Always blame. And Rob and Michelle? They kept trying. They paid for treatment. Again and again. They opened their home. Again and again. They told themselves love would fix it. Tracy watched it happen, helpless and furious. Because every time Nick was rescued, his fantasy grew stronger. In his mind, support meant validation. Money meant endorsement. Silence meant agreement. And consequences? They didn't exist in his world. The guest house, a kingdom of isolation. When Nick moved into the guest house on the Brentwood estate, something shifted. The physical separation mattered. He was close enough to feel powerful, far enough to feel unchallenged. That guest house became his command center, his echo chamber. Inside, according to later testimony, were whiteboards filled with plans, lists of people who had wronged him. Even his parents were beginning to talk, quietly, about limits, about structure, about saying no. And for someone like Nick, no wasn't just rejection. It was annihilation. The throne was gone. The kingdom exposed as empty. And when a fantasy dies, it doesn't always go quietly. Because the next morning, that alternate reality would collide violently with the real world. And the cost would be unimaginable. But what Tracy would discover next, hidden among Nick's things after the arrest, would reveal just how long he had been preparing for that collision, and how close the family came to stopping it. If only they had looked sooner. Because what she found next wasn't a journal. It was a map, and it pointed straight to the unthinkable. What do you do when you've built your life telling stories, but you can't fix the one inside your own home? Rob Reiner was a master of structure, of character, of arcs and resolutions. But there was one story he couldn't direct. His own son's descent. And that failure, quiet, unspoken, and deeply personal, haunted him more than anyone knew. Because behind the smiles, behind the activism, behind the Oscars and standing ovations, was a father breaking. And Tracy saw it, long before the press, before the courtrooms, before the blood on the floor. She saw the man who could craft cinematic magic, helpless in the face of his child's unraveling. This chapter? It's not about Nick. It's about Rob. And the secret heartbreak he carried to his grave. The Hollywood icon with a father's heart. Let's rewind, not to Rob Reiner the legend, but Rob Reiner the dad. By all accounts, he was fiercely loyal, affectionate, engaged, the kind of father who showed up, even when life was chaotic. He didn't believe in absentee parenting, not after what he'd seen in the industry growing up. When Nick was born, Rob was nearing 50. A different kind of dad. Wiser, more present, more available, or at least, that's how it started. But something shifted as Nick got older. And it wasn't because Rob stopped caring. It was because Nick didn't want to be fathered, not in the traditional sense. He wanted to be validated. And for Rob, that became the emotional trap. Because how do you love someone who interprets every boundary as betrayal? Rob's guilt about success. It started small. Rob would talk to friends about missing the signs, about being too distracted by work in the early years. He once told a close friend at a charity event, "I gave him everything, except maybe enough of myself." That was the first layer of guilt. But the second? The guilt of being admired. Tracy later admitted that Rob felt deep discomfort about how the world adored him, while his son resented him. It tore him up, she said. He'd come home from an awards show glowing, and Nick would barely look at him. Or worse, accuse him of rubbing it in. So Rob dimmed his own light. He stopped talking about projects around Nick. He downplayed his accomplishments. He tried, in his own way, to shrink himself, hoping Nick would grow in the space left behind. But Nick didn't grow. He stewed, and Rob suffered silently. The private therapy sessions. In 2020, Rob and Nick began attending private therapy sessions, something that would never appear in public biographies or interviews. They were recommended by Michelle, who hoped the space would help rebuild trust. At first, it worked. There were breakthroughs. Nick admitted feeling forgotten. Rob admitted struggling to connect. They laughed. They cried. They hugged. But it didn't last. According to the therapist, whose notes were subpoenaed later, Nick began using the sessions as a stage. He performed. He deflected. He even accused Rob of deliberately creating movies that mocked him. Rob was devastated. He knew it wasn't true, but hearing it from his son was like being stabbed. Still, he didn't walk away. He kept showing up, week after week, because that's what a father does, even when he's not sure it's helping. Rob's confessions to Tracy. Here's where it gets raw. Tracy remembers a moment in mid-2023. They were sitting on the back patio of the Brentwood estate. It was just before sunset. The lights soft and golden, like something out of a film Rob might have directed. And then, quietly, he said, "I don't think I know my own son." Not in anger, in surrender. He talked about the rage in Nick's eyes, The paranoia, the accusations, the emptiness. He doesn't want my love, Rob said. He wants my throne. It was the first time Tracy had ever heard her father sound afraid. Not just of what Nick might do, but of what Nick already was. The letter he never sent. There's a letter. It was found in Rob's desk drawer after the tragedy. Folded neatly. Unsealed. Unsent. Addressed. To my son, when you're ready. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even emotional. It was clinical. Almost cold. A list of observations. Boundaries. Regrets. Rob wrote, I have tried to be the father you needed, even when I didn't know how. I see now that I cannot rescue you from the parts of yourself you refuse to face. I will always love you, but I cannot let that love destroy me anymore. Tracy wept when she read it, not just for her father's pain, but for the fact that he never got to send it, that he never got to say those words to Nick. And maybe, that Nick never got the chance to read them before it was too late. The private phone call no one knew about. There's one more moment Tracy has never spoken about publicly. Until now. 3 days before the murders, Rob called her. It was late. 11:42 p.m. She almost didn't pick up. When she did, Rob sounded tired. Not sick. Not frantic. Just drained. He asked how she was. Asked about work. Then paused and said, I need you to know something, sweetheart. She waited. If anything happens, he said, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. Do you hear me? Tracy asked what he meant. He wouldn't say. He just repeated it. Twice more. Then told her he loved her. And hung up. She didn't sleep that night. And now? She wonders if that was his goodbye. The man behind the legend. It's easy to remember Rob Reiner as the public figure. The sitcom genius. The director of classics. The political firebrand. But Tracy wants the world to know the man behind it all. The man who sat with her through heartbreak. Who once wrote her a song on her 13th birthday and sang it, terribly, on guitar. Who gave long, rambling speeches about storytelling over dinner. Who cried during Pixar movies. Who believed, to the very end, that love could save anyone, even his son. But love doesn't always win. And sometimes, it gets you killed. Tracy's promise. At Rob's private memorial, Tracy didn't read a poem or quote a script. She read the letter, the one Rob never sent. And then she made a promise. I will not let your story be rewritten by your murderer. Because that's what Nick wanted, in the end. To become the author. To take control of the narrative. To erase the pain by creating a final, irreversible act. But Tracy won't let that happen. She's telling the story now. Piece by piece. Scene by scene. Even when it hurts. Even when it breaks her. Because that's what her father would have done. But just when she thought she had uncovered every secret. A lawyer arrived with a sealed file labeled Estate Contents, Sensitive. Inside, an updated will, dated 3 weeks before the murders. And in it, Rob had made a decision no one expected. A decision that may have triggered everything that followed. Because Nick wasn't just left out of the will. He was explicitly disinherited. And in his place, someone else had been named. Someone whose identity would send shockwaves through the courtroom. And destroy what little illusion of family Nick had left. Chapter 3 complete. Type go when you're ready to continue to Chapter 4. Go. Chapter 4, The Final Family Dinner. Section length target. 2000 plus words. They say hindsight is 20/20ths. But sometimes, it's unbearable. Because when Tracy Reiner looks back now at that final dinner, just 2 days before the murders, she sees it all differently. The silences. The glances. The cracks in the conversation. At the time, it felt awkward. Now, it feels like a funeral with food. A final performance before a horror show. And the scariest part? No one saw it coming. Except maybe Nick. Because by the end of that night, he wasn't saying goodbye. He was signing a death sentence. The setup, one last attempt at normal. December 12th. Rob had insisted on it. A quiet dinner, just the immediate family. Michelle cooked. Tracy brought wine. Nick offered to set the table. Already, that was unusual. Tracy remembers the way Nick carefully placed each plate, aligning the forks like he was trying to impress a ghost. He wore a black button-down shirt. No stains. No rolled-up sleeves. He looked clean. Presentable. Almost controlled. Too controlled. Michelle noticed it too. She gave Tracy a subtle look while stirring the potatoes. But neither of them said anything. Because that's what families do, right? They hope. Even when everything inside them is screaming not to. Tension under the surface. The dinner began with small talk. Rob asked about Tracy's next production. Michelle chimed in about a book she was reading. Nick stayed mostly quiet. He picked at his food, nodding occasionally, his eyes darting between them like he was observing a scene, not living in it. And then came the first shift. Rob, gently, asked Nick how things were going. Good, Nick said quickly. I've been writing again. Really? Rob replied, a spark of hope in his voice. Yeah. Something big. Something meaningful. Tracy asked, what's it about? Nick stared at her. Then, with a slow smile, he said, about a man who's surrounded by liars and finally does what no one expects. Silence. Rob raised an eyebrow. Michelle's fork paused midair. Tracy forced a laugh. Sounds intense. Nick didn't laugh back. The voicemail that never got played. Later, after the police had processed the crime scene, they found Rob's phone near the couch. On it, a saved voicemail. Timestamped 6:08 p.m., roughly 30 minutes after dinner began. From Tracy. She hadn't meant to send it. It was a pocket dial. But in the background, the recording captured something odd. Clinking silverware. Low voices. And Nick saying something quietly. They still think they're in control. Then a pause. Followed by, but they'll see. To this day, the audio is grainy. But the words, confirmed by forensic experts, are clear enough. And haunting. The last toast. After dessert, Rob lifted his glass for a toast. To new beginnings, he said. Nick raised his glass too. But Tracy noticed his hand was trembling. Ever so slightly. Then, as the others sipped, Nick spoke again, slowly, as if weighing each word. You know what I've realized? Everyone turned to him. I used to think I wanted your approval, he said, staring at Rob. But I don't anymore. Tracy felt her stomach drop. Nick continued. Because approval is just a leash. You hold it. I dance for it. And I'm done dancing. Rob didn't say a word. Neither did Michelle. They just looked at him. And in that moment, Tracy swears, she felt the shift in the air. Like the room suddenly got colder. After dinner, the whisper. As Tracy was leaving, she hugged Michelle first. Then Rob. Nick stood near the doorway, hands in his pockets. She walked over, trying to keep things light. Same time next week? She asked. Nick didn't respond. Instead, he leaned in. Far closer than necessary, and whispered in her ear. You'll remember me for this. She pulled back slightly. What? He smiled. That hug. It was the first honest one. Then he turned and walked away. At the time, she told herself it was just Nick being Nick. Now, she hears those words every time she closes her eyes. The conversation between Rob and Michelle that night. Michelle journaled almost daily, short entries, nothing dramatic. But December 12th's entry, found in a notebook hidden in her nightstand, read, Dinner was strange. Nick's energy is wrong. Rob noticed it too. We're going to talk to him tomorrow. Something isn't right. He's somewhere else. Somewhere far away. Tracy never saw that journal until after the funerals. And when she read that entry, she broke. Because Michelle felt it too. They all felt it. But no one acted. Not fast enough. The morning after. On December 13th, Rob texted Tracy. Simple. Brief. Thanks for being there last night. Love you. It would be the last text she ever received from him. But what stood out most? The punctuation. Rob always added a smiley face. A dash of humor. A dad joke. Not this time. Just 3 words. Flat. Final. Was it exhaustion? Or something deeper? Was Rob already starting to sense the danger sitting just feet away in his own home? We'll never truly know. Security camera footage, the chilling detail. Authorities later reviewed security footage from outside the house on December 12th. One camera, positioned near the side gate, showed Nick pacing in the backyard alone after everyone else had gone to bed. He was talking to himself. Loudly. Erratically. No phone in sight. No headphones. Just Nick. Muttering. One line caught on the footage stands out. They think it's their house. But it's mine now. Investigators believe this moment may have marked the tipping point. The moment the fantasy became a plan. And that plan would unfold barely 36 hours later. Tracy's nightmare that night. This is a detail almost no one knows. That night, after the dinner, Tracy had a dream. She was in a burning house. Running room to room, calling out for her parents. Smoke thick, walls melting. And at the center of it all, standing calmly in the flames, was Nick. Smiling. She woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding. She almost called her dad. Almost. But she didn't want to seem paranoid. Didn't want to ruin the fragile peace they'd tried to build. So she went back to sleep. And by the time she woke up the next morning, it was already too late. But the envelope was still sealed. 2 days later, Tracy would return to that same house. Not for dinner, but to identify the bodies. And while going through her father's personal desk drawers, she would find it. A sealed envelope, labeled in her father's handwriting. In case of the unthinkable. What could Rob possibly have known? Was it just fatherly precaution? Or did he know? Inside the envelope was more than just a letter. It was a series of documents, passwords, and instructions, including one chilling note. If this is ever opened, do not let Nick control the narrative. He will try, and he will lie. That sentence stopped Tracy cold, because what came next wouldn't just confirm her father's worst fears. It would expose a dark truth about the will. A truth that might have pushed Nick to the brink. And the name Rob had written in as his sole heir wasn't Michelle, wasn't Tracy, and definitely wasn't Nick. It was someone else entirely. Someone who hadn't been seen in years. Someone Nick hated. And that name, what happens when someone raised on illusions finally sees reality? They break. But in Nick Reiner's case, he didn't just break. He snapped. Violently, strategically, and with the cold fury of someone who believed the world owed him everything and gave him nothing. That's the danger of unchecked entitlement. It doesn't disappear. It festers. It mutates. It becomes a weapon. And Nick? He wielded it like a sword. This chapter reveals how Nick's entitlement wasn't just a personality flaw. It was a ticking time bomb. One that had been ticking louder every year. Until the will detonated it. The shocking discovery. Who was named in the will? Asterisk asterisk. 3 weeks before Rob and Michelle's deaths, Rob quietly updated his will. He didn't tell the whole family. He didn't make a big announcement. He simply went to his lawyer, made the changes, and filed it. But why? Because he had come to a terrifying realization. Nick wasn't just unstable. He was dangerous. And the inheritance Rob had planned for him could become gasoline on a fire. So he made a choice. A brutal one, but necessary. He disinherited Nick. Completely. No trust. No clauses. No conditional payouts. Nothing. But what shocked Tracy wasn't that Rob cut Nick out. It was who he gave everything to. A name she hadn't heard in years. Evan McAllister. Asterisk asterisk. Wait. Who is Evan McAllister? Asterisk asterisk. To the outside world, Evan is a ghost. But to those close to the Reiner family, he was the son of Michelle's sister, Nick's cousin. Evan grew up spending summers at the Brentwood estate. He was calm, gentle, studious. A stark contrast to Nick's stormy presence. He was like the son Rob wished he had. Smart, grateful, humble. Tracy remembered Evan reading scripts with Rob late into the night, offering thoughtful notes, asking about story structure. Unlike Nick, who mocked the creative process, Evan studied it. He didn't want shortcuts. He wanted to earn his place. And that's what terrified Nick the most. Because in Evan, he saw the threat of deserved legacy. So he made sure Evan was pushed away. In 2019, after a heated family argument, Evan stopped visiting. He went no contact. No one talked about it publicly. But Rob never stopped checking in. And 3 weeks before his death, he made Evan his heir. Tracy believes this decision wasn't just financial. It was symbolic. It was Rob's final message. Legacy should be earned, not demanded. Asterisk asterisk. Nick's reaction when he found out asterisk asterisk. Here's where things get dark. According to court testimony, the updated will had been quietly filed. But one of Rob's assistants had mentioned the name Evan on a phone call. That call, Nick overheard it. It's not confirmed how much he heard. But based on what happened next, it was enough. Nick stormed into the main house the next day, slammed the door, demanded to speak with his father. Rob, calm but firm, asked him to sit down. What followed was described by a housekeeper as the loudest fight they'd ever heard. Nick screaming, accusing, crying, then silence, then the sound of Rob saying, "You chose this path, Nick. You did." Nick left the house that night without a word. And within 48 hours, Rob and Michelle would be dead. The spiral begins asterisk asterisk. Tracy later discovered Nick's private notes. Not a journal this time. A spiral notebook. Unmarked. Inside, page after page of scrawled thoughts. One recurring phrase. They made me nothing. Over and over. They made me nothing. And beneath that? A checklist. Dinner. 12th, white heavy check mark. Goodbye, white heavy check mark. Make them understand question mark. Take it back question mark. Tracy showed this to investigators. They were stunned. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a build-up. A manifesto of entitlement finally boiling over. Nick's online echo chamber asterisk asterisk. Here's where it gets more disturbing. Nick had a hidden online persona. On anonymous forums, he vented. About family. About fame. About the ones who steal legacy. He posted under the alias asterisk, Truthair 92. Asterisk. One post read, when your throne is stolen, what are you supposed to do? Smile and clap? Asterisk asterisk. Another. Sometimes kings have to burn kingdoms to take them back. The language was theatrical, delusional, but behind it was a very real plan. A fantasy of revenge, wrapped in entitlement, fueled by rage. Tracy's realization, too late asterisk asterisk. 2 days after the murder, Tracy was alone in her hotel room. The words Nick wrote the morning of asterisk asterisk. Yes, there's more. Tracy found a final, chilling note in Nick's guest house. Dated, December 14th, 2025, 6:21 a.m. Time of the murders, estimated between 6:30 and 7:15 a.m. The note read, I've waited my whole life to be heard. Today I become the author. 6 words were underlined. They took everything. Now I take back. There was no signature, but it didn't need one. Everyone knew who wrote it and why. But what came next would shake the case asterisk asterisk. Just as the prosecution was preparing to make their case airtight, Nick's lawyer dropped a bombshell. A sealed envelope, found after Nick's arrest, containing a recorded statement. One Nick had made the night before the murders. In it, he lays out his version of the story, his justifications, his fury, and one explosive claim that someone else pushed him toward the edge, someone who encouraged his rage. And that person was very, very close to the family. Too close. Now, Tracy faces the chilling possibility. Was Nick acting alone? Or was he manipulated? Because what he said in that recording, and who he named, shocked everyone in the courtroom. And it wasn't Evan. It was someone no one expected. And it would fracture what little was left of the Reiner family. Have you ever walked into a house so quiet it screamed? That's what the housekeeper said. The one who found them. The Brentwood estate, a fortress of privacy, legacy, and fame, had seen decades of laughter, guests, premieres, and holidays. But on the morning of December 14th, 2025, it was different. Too still, too silent. And inside, a scene so gruesome, so disorienting, that even seasoned officers paused before crossing the threshold. But it wasn't just the horror that shocked them. It was what, and who, was waiting outside. This chapter isn't about theory. It's about the scene itself, the timeline, the evidence, and the moment Nick Reiner stopped pretending and stepped fully into the darkness he'd been dancing around for years. 6:02 a.m., the arrival. The housekeeper, Elena Torres, had been with the Reiner family for over 15 years. She wasn't just staff. She was trusted. She arrived that morning a bit earlier than usual. The sun wasn't fully up. The air was cold, damp from an overnight drizzle. She let herself in through the side gate, something she did every day. But this time, the gate was unlocked. That was the first red flag. The Reiners were meticulous about security. Tracy later confirmed. Michelle always locked up before bed. Elena paused, then stepped inside. And immediately, she felt it. Stillness. Not the peaceful kind. The wrong kind. She called out. Once, then again. No answer. 6:05 a.m. The discovery. She walked into the kitchen. The lights were on. Coffee had been started, but not poured. Michelle's phone sat buzzing on the marble countertop. 5 missed calls. 1 voicemail. A text from Tracy. You okay? Then, down the hallway she saw it. Rob's feet. Motionless. Sticking out from behind the couch. She dropped the mail, ran forward, and screamed. There he was, Rob Reiner, lying on his back. Eyes open. Chest soaked in blood. Just beyond him, crumpled in a pool of crimson, was Michelle, her hand stretched out, as if she had tried to crawl to him. Elena stumbled backward, dialed 911 with shaking hands. 6:11 a.m. LAPD response. Brentwood PD arrived within minutes. followed quickly by LAPD's Major Crimes Unit. What they found was unlike anything they'd seen in a celebrity case. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no ransacked rooms, just silence, stillness, and blood, lots of it. Both Rob and Michelle had been stabbed multiple times. Defensive wounds on their arms indicated they had fought back, especially Michelle. But there was no sign of a struggle in the room. No overturned furniture. No shattered glass. That told detectives one thing. They knew their killer, and they never saw it coming. 6:25 a.m., the back porch. Officer Dana Wells was the one who found him. Nick, sitting on the back porch. Shoes off, jeans soaked, blood on his hands, his neck, his sleeves. Not moving, not running, just sitting. He looked up when they approached, smiled, and said one word. Finally. 6:30 a.m. Nick is taken into custody. He didn't resist. He didn't cry. He didn't even ask what was happening. He simply stood up, extended his wrists, and said, "I was wondering how long it would take." Officers noted his calmness, his clarity. He wasn't high. He wasn't confused. He was focused, as if this was always the end of the story in his mind, as if the blood was just punctuation. The murder weapons, and what they were missing. 2 knives were found in the sink, cleaned, but poorly. Forensics still picked up blood traces, Rob's and Michelle's. But here's where it gets chilling. The blades came from a collector's set Rob kept locked in a display case in the dining room. A gift from Martin Scorsese, no less. That case? Pried open. No fingerprints on the glass. Nick had worn gloves. This wasn't a spontaneous act of rage. It was methodical. And inside the display case, where the knives had rested, a note. Handwritten. Just 3 words. Heir reclaiming throne. What Nick said during interrogation. He was read his rights. He nodded through them. Didn't flinch. When asked why he did it, he gave no straight answer. He talked in circles. About justice. About betrayal. About being written out of history. Detectives pressed him. He leaned forward and said, "You all think I'm a monster, but they're the ones who erased me." Then he sat back, silent, as if that explained everything, as if it was enough. Tracy arrives at the scene. It was 7:42 a.m. when Tracy's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost let it go. But she answered, and the voice on the other end? Detective Lisa Thorne. The words hit her like a car crash. "Tracy, I'm so sorry. Your father and Michelle have been found dead in their home. Your brother Nick is in custody." She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She went numb. A void opened in her chest, deep and endless. By 9 a.m., she was at the house. The yellow tape, the flashing lights, the smell of wet grass and something metallic. She wasn't allowed inside, but she saw Nick. Through the window of the squad car. He looked up, met her eyes, and winked. That was the moment Tracy said her heart broke in half. Because that wink, it wasn't guilt. It was triumph. Autopsy reports, the final moments. According to the coroner's findings, Rob was attacked first, likely while seated. 1 stab to the chest, then another, then 4 more. Michelle entered the room, screamed, ran to him, was stabbed in the back. She turned to fight, scratched her attacker's arm. DNA confirmed it. She bled out within minutes. No sedatives in their systems. No signs of restraint. They were caught completely off guard. By someone they trusted. By their son. The safe, and what was missing. Rob kept a private safe in his study. Inside were financial records, scripts, rare collectibles, and a backup hard drive. When investigators opened the safe, the hard drive was gone. That's when Tracy remembered something. 2 weeks earlier, Rob had mentioned digitizing family records. Photos, letters, old footage, and more importantly, legal files. Could Nick have stolen it? Was it to erase something? Or expose something? No one knows. Because that drive has never been found. And to this day, no one knows exactly what was on it. Only that Rob had called it the family vault. The letter on Michelle's desk. There was one more chilling detail. On Michelle's nightstand was a note. Undated. Unfinished. Scrawled in pen, mid-sentence. It read, "I think tonight we finally." That's it. As if she'd been interrupted. Or realized something too late. Tracy believes Michelle and Rob were planning to confront Nick that evening. About the will. About the threats. About everything. But Nick acted first. Silenced them forever. But just when investigators thought they had the full picture, an anonymous package arrived at LAPD headquarters 3 days later. No return address. Inside, a USB drive. Encrypted, and once decrypted, it contained a recording, an audio file, dated the night before the murders. The voice, Nick Reiner, speaking directly into a microphone, laying out grievances, narrating his anger. But at one point, he stops and says a name, clearly, deliberately. And it's not Tracy, not Evan, not Rob or Michelle. It's someone else entirely. A figure close to the family, but not family. Someone who, according to Nick, understood the pain and may have encouraged it. The file ends with Nick saying, "This wasn't just mine. It was ours." Suddenly, this wasn't just a solo crime. It might have been a conspiracy, and the person Nick named would shatter everything Tracy thought she knew, even about her own allies. What would you say if you knew it might be the last thing your loved one ever heard? Would it be a warning? A goodbye? A plea? Or would it be something left unfinished? An echo of a thought, cut short by a horror you never saw coming? For Michelle Reiner, the last moments of her life weren't just filled with fear. They were filled with purpose. She wasn't just a victim. She was trying to speak, to leave a message, to protect what mattered. And though she never got to finish her final sentence, what she did say has become one of the most haunting threads in this entire nightmare. Because Michelle's final words might hold the key to everything. And what they reveal is more than just heartbreak. It's prophecy. The morning routine that never finished. December 14th, 6 a.m. Michelle Reiner's phone alarm went off like it did every day. She was an early riser, loved to journal, meditated, brewed French press coffee with almond milk creamer, always read the New York Times front page, even if she was mid-travel. That morning was no different. At first, the coffee pot was halfway brewed when investigators arrived. Her reading glasses were on the counter, beside a half-written grocery list. Eggs, greens, oat milk, call Tracy. She never made the call. But here's where things get strange. A voicemail, timestamped 6:03 a.m., was sent from her phone to Tracy's. It lasted 47 seconds. And for weeks, Tracy couldn't bring herself to listen. Until she did. And what she heard made her knees buckle. The voicemail from the edge. The recording begins with ambient sounds, the clink of glass, footsteps. Then Michelle's voice, distant but clear. "I think he's up. I heard him pacing again last night. We need to." Silence. Muffled background movement. Then a sharp gasp, not of fear, of realization. As if she suddenly saw something, heard something, understood something. Then 3 more words. "If I don't." Click. It ends. No goodbye, no panic, just a fragment. A signal flare fired into a storm too big to stop. Tracy listened to that voicemail 6 times in a row. And on the 7th, she heard something else, right before the line cut. A door creak. Heavy breathing. And what sounded like footsteps approaching. Michelle's warning signs. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, Michelle had confided in Tracy more than once. Nothing overtly dramatic. Just tension, worry, a gnawing instinct something was building. "He's different," she texted once. "Like he's halfway here and halfway somewhere else." Another time, "We're going to need to have a serious talk with Nick. I think Rob is finally seeing it too." Michelle wasn't naive. She loved her son, fiercely, even through addiction, therapy, relapse, heartbreak. But love doesn't always blind you. Sometimes, it sharpens your vision. And Michelle was starting to see clearly. Unfortunately, so was Nick. The journal entry that stopped Tracy cold. While packing up her stepmother's belongings, Tracy found a small leather journal. Nothing fancy. Mostly grocery lists, reminders, affirmations. But December 13th entry, the last one Michelle ever wrote, was different. It read, "The house feels heavy. Rob is worried. I tried to talk to N again, but he shut down. Maybe we've protected him too long. We'll try again tomorrow." A pause in the handwriting. Then a final line. "If you're reading this, and something's happened, just know." And that's it. The pen stopped. Mid-sentence. The ink even bled slightly on the page, as if pressed too hard. As if she was startled. Or interrupted. Tracy still carries that journal in her bag. Because it's not just paper. It's a voice. One trying desperately to be heard. Tracy's guilt. Grief is never quiet. But guilt? It's deafening. Tracy can't stop thinking about the missed calls. The half-finished conversations. The time she brushed off Michelle's worry with, "We've been through worse, haven't we?" Or the time she ignored Nick's cryptic messages because she wasn't in the mood for his games. "I should have pushed harder," she told her therapist. "I should have stayed that night after dinner. I should have." But should-haves don't bring back the dead. And in the vacuum left behind, only one thing remains. What exactly was Michelle trying to say? And why did she try to reach out right then? The hidden audio file. After reviewing Michelle's phone, forensic techs uncovered something unexpected. A voice memo, timestamped just after the voicemail. Likely auto-recorded by accident when Michelle tapped the memo app instead of the call screen. It lasted 1 minute, 13 seconds. Most of it is silence. But then, at exactly 47 seconds in, a muffled argument begins. "Michelle, Nick, this isn't the way. Nick, you made me invisible. Michelle, we never stopped loving. Nick, liar." Then a crashing sound, and the recording stops. It wasn't just a voicemail. It was a confrontation, one that turned deadly. The crime scene detail no one expected. In the autopsy report, one detail stood out. Michelle had a cut on her left palm. A deep, defensive wound. But more importantly, under her fingernails, they found paper fibers. Analysis confirmed it came from notebook paper. But what page? Where was it? Tracy believes Michelle tried to leave a written message in those final moments. Maybe she was grabbing at the journal. Maybe trying to write something down. But whatever it was, it never made it out. Because the next thing Michelle did was scream. And by then, it was too late. Tracy's realization, this wasn't just about money. Up until this point, everyone thought the motive was obvious. The will, the inheritance, the legacy. But Tracy, after piecing together Michelle's final words, began to suspect something else. Something deeper. Something older. Because the rage in Nick's voice on that audio recording, it wasn't about wealth. It was about erasure. About identity. About power. He wasn't just killing his parents. He was trying to kill the version of himself they refused to believe in. The dangerous one. The broken one. The one they tried to medicate, contain, fix, forgive. And when that failed, he chose annihilation. The last clue, a word repeated. Forensic linguists reviewed the recordings, the voicemail, and the memo file. And one word stood out. Remember. Michelle said it twice before the line went dead. "I just want someone to remember. Please remember." Was she talking to Tracy? To Rob? To the world? Or to Nick? Was it a plea for mercy? Or a cry for justice? We'll never fully know. But Tracy believes that word wasn't random. It was Michelle's final gift. Her final defiance. Because even as the knife came down, she fought to be remembered for something true. But just as Tracy began to find peace in those final words, another audio file surfaced. This one not from Michelle's phone, but from the missing hard drive. Recovered unexpectedly during a search of a storage unit tied to Nick's online alias. And on that hard drive, dozens of recordings. Private conversations, therapy sessions, phone calls, and one labeled, "Mom, day before." A secret recording Nick made, without Michelle's knowledge. And in it, she confesses something. Something about Nick's childhood. Something Rob never knew. A secret that might explain everything. And once Tracy heard it, she broke. Because Michelle's final words weren't the end. They were the beginning of an even darker truth. One that might shatter the family's legacy forever. And finally answer the question. What made Nick Reiner who he became? What does a monster look like after the storm? Is he trembling? Regretful? Crying behind bars? Not Nick Reiner. When officers brought him into custody on the morning of December 14th, he wasn't the shattered remnant of a broken man. He was calm, composed, almost smug, like someone who had rehearsed this scene in his head 1,000 times and was finally getting to perform it. This wasn't a tragedy, not in Nick's eyes. It was a climax. And the courtroom, the interviews, the entire criminal process. To him, it was just another stage. But Tracy, sitting in the gallery, watching her brother go from shadowy threat to public spectacle, saw something no one else did. A glint behind his eyes. Something rehearsed. Calculated. And that was when she realized. Nick wasn't done yet. The first 24 hours, the mask drops. After Nick was arrested, he was transported to the West LA detention facility. The first footage recorded, later leaked by an officer anonymously, showed Nick walking down the hallway barefoot, shoelaces removed, hands cuffed in front. He looked straight at the camera and smirked. Not smiled, not flinched. Smirked, as if to say, "This is the moment I've been waiting for." Tracy watched that footage from her hotel room. Over and over and over. She said later, "That wasn't Nick. That was something else. Or maybe that was the real Nick, and we were the ones who never saw him clearly." Interrogation room. The game begins. Detectives brought him in, standard protocol. Room temperature, neutral colors, no distractions. Nick sat across from Detective Lisa Thorne and Sergeant Jacob Mercer. He refused a lawyer at first, said he wanted to speak his truth. That set the tone. He didn't deny anything, didn't ask for clarification. When asked about the morning of December 14th, he began to talk. Not panicked, not hesitant, but as if reading from a script. "I made them see," he said. "They kept trying to erase me, like I was a smear on their legacy." He paused. "They didn't get to choose the ending. I did." Mercer asked, "Are you saying you planned this?" Nick looked up, eyes wide and calm. "No," he said. "I wrote it." Nick's lawyer steps in and refuses to enter a plea. Eventually, Nick requested counsel. Alan Jackson, a high-profile criminal defense attorney known for celebrity cases, arrived late in the afternoon. According to insiders, Jackson was visibly rattled by what he heard during his first private meeting with Nick. Why? Because Nick didn't want to plead not guilty. He wanted to explain. He believed the world needed to hear his version. Jackson refused. At Nick's arraignment on December 17th, when asked for a plea, Jackson made the rare move of declining to enter one. The judge entered a not guilty plea on Nick's behalf. But in the gallery, Tracy knew something that the court didn't. Nick didn't want to walk free. He wanted to be understood. Worse, he wanted to be celebrated. The courtroom circus.